Imagine, imagine writing a massive book today, like a 500-page book.
Right. A huge undertaking.
Yeah, exactly. You present it to the world, and you make this really bold claim. You say that it's a completely original, independent translation of a lost ancient language.
A language that presumably literally no one else on Earth can read.
Right, no one. So obviously people are going to want to test that, right? Historians and linguists take your brand new manuscript and they run it through modern plagiarism software.
Oh, of course. The digital comparative tools we have now are just ruthless.
They really are. They don't just look for, like, general themes. They hunt down exact word-for-word string matches.
Yeah, they just scan for identical data.
Exactly. And when the progress bar on this software hits 100%, the screen in front of these researchers lights up. And I mean, it doesn't just light up with a few scattered, highlighted phrases. Entire pages, like consecutive chapters, are just glowing in red.
Wow. And it's not just matching any random text either. The software shows that your supposedly independent, fresh translation matches a document published centuries earlier.
Right.
It matches down to the highly specific, stylistic connective tissue, the exact archaic phrasing. It even includes documented translation errors of that older text.
I mean, if you are an academic looking at that screen, your brain just completely stops. You are no longer asking if the texts are similar. The software answered that.
The similarity is an empirical fact at that point.
Yeah, you are staring at an undeniable anomaly, and you are forced to ask, how on earth did this happen?
And that is the exact historical and literary collision we are exploring today on The Deep Dive. It is an absolute masterclass in textual criticism.
Welcome, everyone. We are jumping straight into one of the most fascinating, complex, and honestly intensely debated textual anomalies in modern religious history.
It's a huge topic.
It really is. We are looking at the massive textual overlap between two profoundly influential books, the Book of Mormon, which was published in 1830, and the King James Version of the Bible.
And specifically, we're talking about the translation finalized by British scholars in 1611.
Right, the 1611 KJV. Now, to be incredibly clear about the parameters of our discussion today, we are not dealing in hearsay. We're not, looking at historical caricatures or vague internet rumors.
No, not at all. We have a stack of highly precise technical sources right in front of us.
We are analyzing side-by-side concordance program screenshots. We're looking at qualitative probability models regarding the actual science of translation.
Yeah, and we're examining the sober, official testimonies, along with the rigorous academic arguments from both sides, from critical scholars and Latter-day Saint or LDS scholars.
And right here at the top, before we get into the weeds, we need to explicitly establish the ground rules for you, the listener. We are not here to take a side.
Absolutely not.
We are not here to endorse a specific religious worldview. And we are equally not here to endorse a specific secular or critical viewpoint. We are just your impartial guides.
Exactly. Our whole job is to lay the textual evidence on the table because the data, the actual words printed on the page, is identical for both camps.
The red text is the red text.
Right. We are going to explore this undeniable textual overlap, and then we're going to report how different foundational assumptions process and interpret that exact same set of data.
Okay, let's unpack this. And I think we need to start with the official genesis of the Book of Mormon.
That's the best place to start.
Because if we're going to understand why this textual overlap is so strange, we have to deeply understand the official origin story that frames the text. We aren't going to spend an hour on the basic Sunday school narrative, but we do need to establish the timeline.
And most importantly, the claimed mechanics of the translation. That's crucial.
Yes, the mechanics. So the baseline narrative is that the Book of Mormon originated in the ancient Americas.
Right. The official claim from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is that ancient prophets engraved their history, their teachings, and their revelations onto golden metal plates.
Okay, golden plates. And then around 400 AD, a prophet historian named Mormon is said to have abridged centuries of these records.
Right. He compiles them, and then his son, Moroni, buries them in a hillside.
Hill Cumorah, right, in present-day Manchester, New York.
That's the one. So the record goes into the ground around 400 AD.
Okay, so fast forward 14 centuries to the 1820s in upstate New York. A young Joseph Smith reports angelic visitations from that same resurrected Moroni.
Yeah, and in 1827, specifically on September 22nd, Smith officially retrieves these golden plates from the hill.
And then we enter the translation window. This is primarily between 1828 and 1829.
And this is where we really have to slow down and get incredibly granular with the details. The source material states that the language on the plates was a Reformed Egyptian text.
Reformed Egyptian.
Mm,
Okay.
Right. And Joseph Smith's ordained task was to render that ancient, completely unknown dialect into modern English.
Ah.
But we have to understand the how.
Wait, let me stop you there. Because when you say translate, the listener immediately pictures a very specific academic process.
Sure, they picture a scholar.
Yeah. We picture a guy sitting at a mahogany desk in a university library. He's got a cup of tea, a huge stack of heavy grammar books, and a Reformed Egyptian to English dictionary open in front of him.
Painstakingly working out the syntax, right?
Exactly. Looking up root words and conjugating verbs.
Right, the traditional academic method.
Yeah.
But the official historical accounts, the sober testimonies of the people who were actually in the room, describe something entirely different.
Okay, so what did it look like?
Well, the official account explicitly states that Joseph Smith performed this translation by the gift and power of God. He didn't use conventional scholarly tools at all.
No dictionaries.
None. He used divine instruments that were reportedly buried alongside the plates.
The sources refer to these as the Urim and Thummim and a seer stone, right?
Yes, exactly.
And let's be visually precise for the listener here, because understanding the physical mechanics is just so crucial for the textual analysis later. How did this actually work in the room on a Tuesday afternoon?
According to the eyewitness accounts from his scribes, these are people like Oliver Cowdery and his wife, Emma Smith, Joseph Smith would place the seer stone into the bottom of a hat.
A hat, like a regular hat.
Yeah, a hat. He would then press his face into the hat to block out the ambient light in the room. And in that darkness, a spiritual light would shine, and the text would appear to him in English.
Oh, wow. So he's just reading it.
He would dictate those English words aloud, and the scribe sitting across the table would write them down.
Well, the physical plates themselves, from what I understand, often sat on the table wrapped in a cloth, or they were sometimes even in another room entirely.
Right. The translation wasn't a process of his eyes physically scanning the ancient characters and referencing a lexicon. It was a process of divine transmission.
He dictates, they write it down.
Exactly. This happens day after day, culminating in the 1830 publication of the Book of Mormon by Egbert B. Grandin in Palmyra, New York.
And this specific mechanism introduces a massive debate within academic circles. Even among LDS scholars, there's a debate regarding the nature of the translation.
Yes, the debate between a tight translation and a loose translation.
Let's define those, because that distinction is basically the entire battlefield for what comes next.
It really is. So, a tight translation theory suggests that God provided the exact, specific English words to Joseph Smith.
Like a direct feed.
Exactly. The seer stone showed him the precise vocabulary, the spelling, the syntax. It's a literal one-to-one divine dictation.
Okay. And the loose theory.
A loose translation theory suggests that God provided the ancient concepts or the broad ideas to Joseph's mind, but Joseph was left to use his own 19th century vocabulary, his own grammar, and his own cultural framework to express those divine concepts.
Okay, I see. But here's where my brain goes. If you are translating a completely unknown ancient dialect reformed Egyptian without a Rosetta Stone,
Right.
and you are doing it via divine instruments dictating directly to scribes, you would logically expect the resulting English text to be a completely fresh, unique linguistic footprint.
That is the logical assumption.
Whether it's a tight or loose translation, if the source material is an independent ancient document, the English text should sound like its own thing. It shouldn't sound like anything else.
That is the foundational assumption of any independent translation. It should bear no literary dependence on any other existing English book.
It should be totally unique.
Structurally, syntactically, and lexically completely unique.
Which brings us right back to the plagiarism software. This premise of linguistic independence is exactly what gets put to the test when modern analytical tools enter the chat.
It's where the rubber meets the road.
Exactly. What happens when we take this 1830 text, which claims to be a fresh, independent translation of an ancient record, and we run it through modern comparative software against the King James Bible, published by a committee of British scholars 200 years earlier in 1611?
Well, we need to look at the visual evidence provided in our sources. The tool used here is called a concordancer program.
A concordancer program.
Yes, it is a piece of digital software designed to do one thing with ruthless, unfeeling precision. It finds textual overlap.
It doesn't care about theology, right? It doesn't care about the history or the faith claims.
Not at all. It just looks for matching strings of letters. It's pure data analysis.
Okay, so what do these screenshots from the sources actually show us?
The sources provide screenshots of a computer screen split cleanly down the middle. On the left side of the screen, we have the text of the Book of Mormon, and it's formatted entirely in all capital S to visually distinguish it.
Okay, left side, caps lock on.
Right. On the right side, we have the text of the 1611 King James Bible, written in standard sentence case.
And then they hit go. The software scans both texts simultaneously, and whenever it finds an exact word-for-word overlap between the left side and the right side, it changes the font color to red.
Yes, it turns red and creates a hyperlink connecting the two documents.
So as a researcher scrolls through the document, they get an immediate color-coded visual representation of the text. Black text means literary independence. It means unique phrasing.
Exactly. But red text means literary dependence. It means the software has found a match.
Now, if you're listening to this, you might be thinking, okay, they're both religious books, they both talk about God and prophets, so maybe they share some thematic similarity.
Sure, maybe a shared phrase here and there.
Right. You'd expect a little bit of red mixed in with the black, but that is not what the sources show us. They show us pages where the text isn't a mix at all.
No, there are long stretches, entire chapters, pages at a time, that are solid red.
Let's ground this in the specific evidence cited in the concordance screenshots so people know we aren't exaggerating. The software reveals that a chapter known as 1 Nephi 20 in the Book of Mormon corresponds exactly to Isaiah chapter 48 in the KJV.
And it doesn't stop there. 3 Nephi 22 corresponds to Isaiah 54.
2 Nephi 12 perfectly matches Isaiah 2. And just for context for you listening, this is the famous biblical chapter referencing beating swords into plowshares.
You also have 2 Nephi 17 matching Isaiah 7. That's the chapter discussing the days of Ahaz and Syria being confederate with Ephraim.
And 2 Nephi 25 matching Isaiah 15, which begins with the highly distinctive phrase, "Howl, O gate."
It's an incredible amount of overlap.
I want to read one of these examples directly from the source material because talking about overlap abstractly just doesn't do it justice. You, listening, really need to hear just how exact this is.
Please do. Hearing the side-by-side comparison is essential to really understanding the gravity of the data.
Okay, let's look at the screenshot comparing Isaiah 7 and 2 Nephi 17. I'll read the right side of the screen first. The King James Bible, Isaiah chapter 7, verse 1.
Okay.
It reads, "And it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up toward Jerusalem to war against it, but could not prevail against it."
Okay, now let's hear the Book of Mormon version.
Now we look over to the left side of the screen. The Book of Mormon, 2 Nephi chapter 17, verse 1 reads, "And it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah, that Rezin, king of Syria, and Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up toward Jerusalem to war against it, but could not prevail against it."
What's fascinating here is that we are not talking about a summary. We are not talking about an ancient prophet paraphrasing a core theological concept.
No, not at all.
The textual mapping software proves that these passages are nearly verbatim reproductions.
It's the exact same wording, the identical sentence structure, the identical pacing. Let's do verse 2, just to drive it home.
Let's do it.
KJV, Isaiah 7, verse 2. "And it was told the house of David, saying, Syria is confederate with Ephraim, and his heart was moved, and the heart of his people, as the trees of the wood are moved with the wind."
And the left side of the screen.
Book of Mormon, 2 Nephi 17, verse 2. "And it was told the house of David, saying, Syria is confederate with Ephraim, and his heart was moved, and the heart of his people, as the trees of the wood are moved with the wind."
Even the punctuation is practically mirrored. The phrasing is completely identical. And as our source notes, this level of exact word-for-word textual mapping completely shifts the academic conversation.
It really does.
You can no longer ask the question, are these two texts similar? The software has definitively answered that. The red ink proves it. The only academic question left on the table is, why are they identical?
Right, because if you're sitting there listening to this, your brain is immediately trying to categorize it. You're trying to make sense of it.
Right?
You're thinking, well, if two people are translating the exact same ancient ideas, like the writings of Isaiah, wouldn't they naturally land on the exact same English words? Why couldn't this just be a massive lucky coincidence?
That is the natural hypothesis to test next. If the Book of Mormon is an independent translation of an ancient Reformed Egyptian text, what are the mathematical and qualitative chances that it would accidentally align word for word with a 1611 English translation of a Hebrew text?
People love to throw around the phrase 1 in a million. So let's play devil's advocate for a second. Is it just a 1 in a million chance that Joseph Smith and the British scholars just happened to hit the exact same linguistic notes?
Our sources directly address this specific framing. The analysis states that putting a neat rounded number like 1 in a million on this phenomenon is actually misleading.
Misleading how? Like it's too low.
We don't really have a rigorous, universally agreed upon probabilistic mathematical model for independent Bible translations.
Mm.
However, if we reason qualitatively, based on how the actual science and art of translation works, saying the odds are 1 in a million is almost certainly far too generous.
Too generous. Okay, let's break that down. Why is a 1 in a million chance too high? Let's use the example from the source material. We're looking at Isaiah 48, verse 1 from the KJV, which corresponds to 1 Nephi 20, verse 1 in the Book of Mormon.
Right. The KJV reads, "Hear ye this, O house of Jacob, which are called by the name of Israel."
Okay, put yourself in the shoes of a completely independent translator. You have an ancient concept in front of you, a call for the descendants of Jacob to listen, and you need to render that thought into English.
Right.
How many choices do you have for just that one single sentence?
You have a myriad of choices. Translation is not a simple math equation where X in Hebrew always equals Y in English. It's an art of approximations.
It's totally subjective.
Exactly. For the very first phrase, you could choose to translate it as "listen to this." Instead of the archaic "hear ye this," you can say "hear this," or "hear now," or "pay attention."
And for the next part, O house of Jacob, an independent translator could easily and accurately say, descendants of Jacob.
Or family of Jacob, or lineage of Jacob, or children of Jacob.
Right. And for the phrase, which are called by the name of Israel, you might translate that simply as who are named Israel, or who go by the name of Israel, or whose title is Israel.
It's not just vocabulary either, it's syntax and grammar. Do you use modern English or archaic English? You have to determine the phrase order.
Does the verb go before the noun?
Exactly. Does the adjective follow the subject? Every single word, every single comma represents a fork in the road for a translator.
Now think about the probability of an independent translator in the 1820s taking the exact same microscopic fork in the road as a committee of British scholars in 1611. For one single verse, it's incredibly unlikely.
Unlikely, yes, but perhaps. If we stretch our imagination, it's possible for one verse. But the analytical power of the concordance program shows us that we aren't talking about one verse.
We are talking about hundreds of consecutive verses.
Exactly. The software highlights that the Book of Mormon reproduces the exact same archaic pronouns, thee, ye saith, hath. It reproduces the exact same sentence structures. It reproduces the exact same pacing.
If there are dozens of ways to translate a single Hebrew verse into English, the chance of independently producing the same vocabulary, the same archaic pronouns, the same word order, and the same phrasing for entire chapters is effectively astronomically small.
It really defies any known model of independent textual creation.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, in the rigorous field of textual criticism, historians and linguists do not seriously consider independent coincidence a plausible explanation for this kind of data.
They just don't.
When two books overlap this extensively for pages on end, the normal inference-like, the mandatory academic conclusion is what we call literary dependence.
Literary dependence, meaning that one text relies on the other. They are not isolated islands. They share a direct mechanism of borrowing, or a shared source.
Precisely. To help conceptualize this, the source material uses a brilliant analogy that moves us away from abstract math and makes it very concrete: the Gettysburg Address analogy.
Oh, I love this one, because it perfectly captures the absurdity of the coincidence argument.
It really does. Think about this. What are the odds that two people sit down in entirely different rooms, in different centuries, to write a speech about the aftermath of the American Civil War? And they both independently compose the exact wording of the Gettysburg Address.
77 years ago, our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation.
Right. They both just happen to choose those exact words in that exact order for the entire speech. You wouldn't ask, what are the odds?
The answer isn't expressed as a probability matrix.
Right. You'd say someone copied someone else. The similarity is so extensive, so specific, that the only rational inference is that there is a shared source. Coincidence is completely off the table.
And we must emphasize that textual scholars contrast this with high school plagiarism. When we say literary dependence, we aren't necessarily making a moral judgment or shouting fraud.
We're not handing out failing grades.
No. In textual criticism, establishing literary dependence is simply about establishing the stemma, the family tree of texts. It's acknowledging that document B is aware of and utilizing document A.
And that is exactly where the academic consensus sits regarding the Book of Mormon and the KJV. Both critical scholars and LDS scholars generally reject astonishing coincidence as the explanation.
That's a really important point to highlight.
Let me repeat that, because it's vital. The apologists and the critics agree on this point. Literary dependence is an established fact. The texts are inextricably linked.
So literary dependence is established. The solid red blocks of text on the screen prove it. But to fully understand the depth of this dependence, we have to look much closer.
We have to zoom in.
We have to move past the macro view of whole chapters and zoom in on the micro view of individual typography. Because the Book of Mormon doesn't just share the general vocabulary of the 1611 Bible.
It shares its highly specific human quirks.
Exactly. We are talking about the tiniest, most peculiar details of the 1611 King James Bible that somehow, inexplicably, made their way into the 1830 Book of Mormon.
This brings us to what many textual critics consider the absolute smoking gun of this entire historical analysis, the KJV italics.
Ah, the italics. This is where it gets really interesting.
Okay, let's talk about the italics. If you open a standard physical copy of a King James Bible, you'll notice that every so often, a word is printed in italics. Now, to a modern reader, italics usually mean emphasis, like, I really want you to listen.
Right, that's how we use them today.
But in the 1611 KJV, italics serve a very specific technical translation purpose, right?
Correct. And we have to understand the specific mandate of the 1611 Translation Committee. They were working primarily from ancient Hebrew manuscripts for the Old Testament.
And Hebrew and English are vastly different languages.
Completely different, structurally and grammatically. Hebrew often omits certain connective words, auxiliary verbs, or definite articles that are absolutely grammatically necessary in English to make a sentence flow and make logical sense.
So the British scholars in 1611 would actively insert English words into the text. They are building a linguistic bridge to make the sentence work for an English reader.
Yes.
But to maintain complete transparency, to show the reader, hey, this specific word isn't actually in the ancient Hebrew text, we added it for clarity, they would print those specific added words in a different typeface. In modern editions, italics.
It was an act of scholarly integrity. They're literally flagging words that have no direct ancient equivalent. These are stylistic filler words, connective tissue uniquely chosen and invented by a specific human committee in 17th century England.
And the revelation from our source material, the thing that jumps off the concordance screen and hits you right in the face, is that these exact italicized non-Hebrew editions sometimes appear verbatim in the text of the Book of Mormon.
This is a devastatingly critical piece of evidence for anyone arguing for a purely independent, tight translation.
It really complicates things.
If the Book of Mormon was an entirely separate, fresh translation from ancient Reformed Egyptian plates, it might naturally contain the core theological ideas of Isaiah, but why on earth would it contain the exact same stylistic connective tissue that was uniquely invented by British scholars in 1611?
Let me give you a concrete example from the text so you can visualize this. In Isaiah 48, verse 1, the King James Version says, "Hear ye this, O house of Jacob, which are called by the name of Israel, and are come forth out of the waters of Judah."
Okay, and are come forth.
In the King James Bible, the words "are come" are italicized. They are supplied by the 1611 translators to make the English tense work. Yet when we look at 1 Nephi 20, verse 1 in the Book of Mormon, we see the exact same phrase, "and are come forth out of the waters of Judah."
It's remarkable. Beyond the italics, the Book of Mormon also reproduces highly distinctive, arguably idiosyncratic KJV translation choices.
Idiosyncratic how?
Well, the source points to phrases like, "No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper," which is found in Isaiah 54, verse 17, and is perfectly mirrored in 3 Nephi 22, verse 17.
And the analysis points out that these are not the obvious or inevitable English renderings of the original Hebrew concept. There are 20 different valid ways to translate the concept of weapons failing against you.
Right.
But the Book of Mormon uses the exact, specific, highly poetical phrasing generated by that 1611 committee.
It goes even deeper into the uncomfortable territory of human error. The science of translation has advanced significantly since 1611.
Oh, absolutely. We know a lot more about Hebrew now.
Modern textual scholars point out places where the 1611 translators demonstrably misunderstood the underlying Hebrew. They made mistakes. They translated words incorrectly based on the limited lexicons of their era.
And wait, let me guess.
Yes, the Book of Mormon text reproduces some of those exact same 17th century translation errors.
So what does this all mean? We have to step back and look at the whole picture. If Joseph Smith is sitting in a room in 1829 with his face in a hat, looking at a seer stone, translating ancient metal plates written by a guy named Mormon in 400 AD,
That's the setup, yeah.
why would his divine translation perfectly mirror the stylistic filler words, the specific poetic flourishes, and even the translation errors chosen by a group of British scholars working more than 1,000 years after Mormon lived?
That is the central, unavoidable, high-stakes question of this deep dive. The data is clear. The verbatim overlap is undeniable. The presence of the KJV italics and specific phrasing is thoroughly documented.
Coincidence is mathematically and logically impossible.
The texts are completely intertwined.
Which perfectly brings us to the fascinating academic standoff that is the grand finale of our deep dive today. We have the exact same set of facts on the table. The red text on the concordant screen is glowing at us.
The italics are staring us down.
Exactly. How do the two different camps of scholars, the critical secular historians and the faithful LDS scholars, explain this undeniable overlap? How do they process this exact same data without one side just throwing in the towel?
This is where we see the immense power of foundational assumptions. We're going to present the two primary academic explanations with complete neutrality, because both are rigorous attempts by intelligent people to explain the exact same data points.
Let's start with the critical scholar view.
For critical scholars, secular historians, and non-LDS textual critics, the conclusion is incredibly straightforward. They look at the verbatim overlap, the shared archaic syntax, the presence of the 1611 italics, and the reproduced translation quirks, and they conclude that Joseph Smith simply had access to the King James Bible.
To them, the evidence points overwhelmingly to the fact that the Book of Mormon's Isaiah passages are dependent on the KJV in a very terrestrial human way.
Yes, exactly.
This could mean direct access. He was literally reading from an open Bible while dictating to his scribes. Or it could mean indirect access. Maybe he possessed a photographic memory or had deeply memorized large, contiguous portions of the Bible through his environmental exposure in a hyper-religious 19th century culture.
From a critical perspective, this extensive verbal overlap is direct, empirical evidence against the claim of an independent ancient translation. They argue that an ancient text, translated independently, simply would not and could not possess the unique linguistic fingerprint of a 17th century British translation committee.
The KJV language is, to them, the smoking gun of a 19th century origin for the Book of Mormon. They see a 19th century man utilizing the tools of his 19th century environment.
Now, we must contrast this with the Latter-day Saint scholarly perspective, and it is vital for you, the listener, to understand that LDS scholars are not ignoring the evidence.
They aren't hiding from it.
They are looking at the exact same red-highlighted concordance screens. They see the italics. They acknowledge the verbatim phrasing. As we established earlier, they do not argue for coincidence either. They do not claim this was a massive accident.
Right. LDS scholars are not putting their heads in the sand. They are offering a different mechanism for how the data came to be. They argue that God intentionally revealed these passages, like the chapters of Isaiah, to Joseph Smith using the familiar pre-existing King James language.
We need to elaborate heavily on this concept because it is central to their argument. They introduce the idea of a translation medium, or divine adaptation.
Divine adaptation.
Yes. In the 1820s, the King James Version was the undisputed scriptural language of the English-speaking world. It was the absolute linguistic standard for Holy Writ. It was how people expected God to sound.
So the LDS academic argument is that if an infinite God is revealing ancient, complex truths to a finite 19th century audience, he would naturally package those truths in the linguistic framework that the audience already recognizes as sacred and authoritative.
Right. God isn't bound to reinvent the wheel.
Exactly. Joseph Smith used the KJV phraseology because it was a divine translation medium, an efficient way to deliver the message.
Furthermore, LDS scholars don't just defensively explain away the similarities. They actively build an offensive case by pointing to the differences. We talked about the screen being mostly red, but there are spots of black.
Right, the black text, the unique phrasing.
There are places where the Book of Mormon's version of Isaiah deviates from the KJV, and LDS scholars spend their time analyzing that black text.
Exactly. When Joseph Smith hits a passage of Isaiah in the Book of Mormon, he doesn't just copy it perfectly every time. Sometimes words are changed, phrases are added, or meanings are completely inverted.
And LDS scholars argue that these specific differences are internal evidence of the text's ancient origin. They suggest that the Book of Mormon preserves older, alternative, or more correct readings of Isaiah that were either lost, corrupted, or deliberately altered in the traditional biblical manuscripts over centuries of transmission.
They really dig into those differences.
They point to places where the Book of Mormon's alterations seem to align better with ancient Hebrew poetic structures, or with older manuscripts like the Dead Sea Scrolls, which of course weren't discovered until a century after the Book of Mormon was published.
Wait, let me stop you there, because that creates a really complex translation model.
Hmm.
If Joseph Smith is using the KJV as a baseline medium, but then selectively altering it where the ancient text demands a more accurate reading, that means we are dealing with a hybrid translation theory.
Yes, a hybrid model.
It's not purely a tight translation of every word, and it's not purely a loose conceptual translation. It's somewhere in between.
You've hit on exactly why this is such a rich field of study. Many LDS scholars propose this hybridized model. They suggest that when the underlying concepts on the golden plates match the concepts in the KJV, the translation process adopted the familiar 1611 language, wholesale italics and all.
Because it was efficient.
Exactly. But when the underlying ancient record differed significantly from the KJV, the translation process became tight, overriding the 1611 text to provide the specific, corrected, ancient reading.
This raises an important question, or rather, it highlights one of the most fascinating academic standoffs in textual history. Both camps completely agree on the textual dependence. Both camps agree that the KJV language is deeply, inextricably embedded in the Book of Mormon.
But they fundamentally disagree on the mechanism of that dependence.
Precisely. It is a debate between human borrowing versus divine adaptation. The critical scholar looks at the 1611 italics and sees a human source document that was copied or memorized by a 19th century author.
And the LDS scholar looks at those same italics and sees a divine tool, a linguistic garment chosen by God to clothe an ancient record in a way that would instantly resonate with a modern audience.
For critics, the KJV language is the ultimate proof of a modern 19th century creation. For LDS scholars, the KJV language was a divine bridge used to make ancient records accessible, while the subtle alterations prove its antiquity.
The exact same data point. The red text on the concordance screen acts as the foundational proof for two completely radically opposed worldview paradigms.
It is a remarkable, vivid example of how data does not interpret itself. The concordance software provides the objective empirical evidence. It highlights the overlap.
But the diagnosis of why that overlap exists depends entirely on the framework, the historical assumptions, and the philosophical worldview of the person looking at the screen.
What an incredible, mind-bending journey this deep dive has been. We started on a hillside in 19th century upstate New York, talking about angels and golden plates.
We moved into the physical mechanics of translating with seer stones and hats.
And then we ran headfirst into the ruthless mathematical precision of digital concordance software. We were staring at glowing red hyperlinks and analyzing the profound theological implications of 17th century English italics.
It truly is a masterclass in how textual analysis works in the real world. We've seen how scholars move from identifying simple similarities to proving undeniable literary dependence through qualitative reasoning and probability models.
We've seen why 1 in a million doesn't even begin to cover the statistical reality of matching entire consecutive chapters of ancient text.
And we've seen why this matters to you, the listener. Whether you are deeply interested in religious history, literature, theology, or data science, this case study is the ultimate proof that objective facts aren't always enough to settle a debate.
It shows how the exact same data, the verbatim overlap of two massively influential texts, can perfectly support vastly different conclusions depending on the foundational assumptions you bring to the table.
The facts of the text are agreed upon by everyone. The interpretation of those facts is where the history is actually written.
Before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final provocative thought to mull over, something that builds on everything we've dissected today. We've talked extensively about the mechanics of the overlap, but let's think about the philosophy of the process itself.
The philosophy of translation.
Yes, if the Book of Mormon's translation process involved divine instruments actively generating an English text that precisely matched a pre-existing 1611 English book, complete with all of its human translator quirks, its added italics, and its specific poetic flourishes, it forces us to ask a profoundly deep question.
What does the word translation actually mean in a religious context?
Exactly. Is a divine translation meant to be an exact, mechanical, linguistic conversion of ancient characters into a new language, a flawless one-to-one cipher that bypasses human culture?
Or is a divine translation something much more fluid?
Is it an act of profound cultural adaptation, intentionally borrowing the familiar language, the recognizable cadence, and even the existing flawed textual tools of the present in order to successfully deliver the message of the past?
If the medium is the message, what does it mean when the divine medium perfectly mimics a specific human translation committee from 1611?
It's a question that keeps the muddy waters of history swirling even when the data itself is perfectly clear. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep looking closely at the texts around you, keep challenging your foundational assumptions, keep asking questions, and we will see you next time.